A lot of the time people think, okay, I want to learn a language, let me get a textbook, let me study a bunch, let me do some highlighting, I'm going to read all about this before I can start speaking. But Duolingo kind of skips all that. If you're using Duolingo, you're actually using really powerful learning science every day, and you might not even know it. My name is Parker. I'm a learning designer at Duolingo, and I work on learning features within the app.
And I'm Audrey. I'm a learning scientist at Duolingo. Learning science is the science of how people learn, and it's a huge part of what we both do. It's based on over 100 years of research in psychology, cognitive science, and neuroscience.
It's our job to make sure when you're using Duolingo, you're actually learning. So today we're going to give you a crash course on 5 of the concepts behind Duolingo's lessons. We'll talk about retrieval practice, noticing patterns, spaced repetition, the zone of proximal development, and communicative competence. And hopefully, by the end of this video, you'll see your Duolingo lessons and the science behind them in a different light. So let's start with one of the most fundamental things that makes Duolingo work.
So it's based on this concept in learning science called retrieval practice. That's this idea that recalling something from memory is actually one of the most powerful things you can do. It's more powerful than rereading something or highlighting it or reviewing your notes. This was made really concrete in a research study. Henry Roediger and Jeff Karpicki at Washington University in St. Louis, they took 2 groups of students and they had them both read the same passage. Then one group practiced just rereading the passage to study it. The other group took practice tests on that passage. Then later on, they tested both groups of students on their memory. And what they found was that the students who actually took those tests, they did much better than the students who just reread those passages. So reaching back and pulling something out of your brain is great for learning. And the harder that reach, the stronger the memory you're building.
When you learn this concept, you see it show up all over the app.
Learning a language is all about noticing patterns. Language is full of patterns. And when you start to notice those patterns, that's when learning happens. So for instance, if there's a pattern like how verbs change depending on who is speaking, so like I talk, he talks, I walk, she walks. When your brain starts to notice that pattern, it starts to predict it. And that is what leads to learning. And so our curriculum is designed around this. So we give you the same word or grammar across different exercises to help your brain notice the pattern. Making mistakes is also a really great way to learn patterns, because when you make a mistake and get feedback on it, that helps you see the difference between what you actually tried and how the language works. So it's just like pulling up directions when you got lost. That route is still fresh in your memory. And so if you take a look and see, oh, that's where I made the wrong turn, it's going to help it stick later.
And actually, you see this come up all the time in the app. So like when you start a lesson, you'll see some grammar tips to help showcase a pattern. Or when you don't know the meaning of a word, you can tap that word and figure out what its meaning is. Or especially when you get a question wrong and that red screen comes up and you see what you put and then the correct answer. And when you make a mistake, that same word or that same structure comes back at the end of your lesson, and even in lessons after that, to make sure you really internalize the pattern after you've seen it.
So memory, unfortunately, fades, but to make something stick, you have to review it just when it's starting to fade from your memory. And that is what's called, in learning science, spaced repetition. So spacing practice out over time. And the whole idea is that you are really trying to retrieve something. So, recall it from your memory exactly when you're starting to forget it. And that's what makes it effective. You can think about it like cramming for an exam. That's less effective than actually spending a little bit of time studying for a week leading up to the exam. You can spend the same total time, but cramming is less effective because you're not spacing out that practice over time. So that's spaced repetition in plain terms. Reviewing material just when you're about to forget it.
And we think about this all the time when we're designing courses for the app. We're really trying to do 2 things at once. We're trying to figure out what you're ready to learn and what you're probably going to forget soon that we need to review. Each unit, you're going to see practice sessions where you get to revisit old vocab that was introduced earlier in the unit, or where grammar from like 1 unit above shows up again. So we schedule each of these practice sessions right when we think you need them most. We're really trying to hone in on what we think you're about to forget and try to re-emphasize it before you do.
So learning has this sweet spot called the zone of proximal development. In learning science, that means something that's just beyond your reach, but achievable with support. The idea is that if something is too easy, you don't grow from it, you don't learn. But if something is too hard, then you get overwhelmed and you disengage. Think of it like a good video game. A good video game is constantly adjusting the challenge level, so it's keeping you on your edge. Basically, it's giving you things that are just challenging enough to be interesting, but achievable. And in language learning, we like to think about this as giving you mostly familiar language with one new thing to focus on and learn. Because if you just had familiar language, that would just be review. But if you had mostly unfamiliar language, that would be overwhelming.
So what does the zone of proximal development look like in Duolingo? Well, one example is when you learn a new word, usually it's in purple. It's one new word in that sentence, but most often all the other words you already know. Additionally, we actually have some technology happening behind the scenes that adjusts your difficulty based on your performance. So if you make fewer mistakes, we're gonna give you harder exercises. And if you make more mistakes, we're gonna bump you down and give you easier exercises. So it's very personalized.
So everything we've covered so far is building towards one really important thing. It's using the language to actually communicate with someone. So to order a coffee, to actually chat with someone new, to follow a conversation. So researchers call this communicative competence. It's the ability to use the language under real conditions with a real person responding. And it's something that only develops through actually practicing. You can think about it kind of like driving. So when you're learning to drive, you can read the highway code for months, but eventually you have to just get in the car and start driving. So it's the driving practice that makes you a good driver, just like it's the communication practice that makes you a good communicator.
And Duolingo is doing a lot to really try to fill in all these gaps. We have Duo Radio, we have speaking adventures, and we have video call that all give you communicative practice. So in Duo Radio, you're listening to real chunks of language and building your listening comprehension. In speaking adventures, you're talking to one of the Duolingo characters and they have expectations for you. So if you want to get that coffee or find that bus stop, you actually have to speak to the character. And then finally, we have video call, which goes even further. You have a face-to-face back and forth conversation with one of the Duolingo characters, and they'll react in real time to what you're saying. You have to keep up with them, but this is what's really building your conversation practice, having an actual conversation.
So everything that we've talked about is building towards this moment, actually using the language with a person. So that's 5 science concepts at the heart of our teaching method: retrieval practice, noticing patterns, spaced repetition, the zone of proximal development, and communicative competence. These are all doing real work each time you open the app, and they're based on decades of high-quality research.
And now that you know these 5 concepts, I bet you're gonna see them all over the app. You see that red screen come up? That's us trying to make you pay attention to a pattern. You see one new word in a sea of familiar words? That's us keeping you in the zone of proximal development. See how many times you can see them. It's actually kind of fun. And let us know what else you're wondering about how we plan our lessons. Drop us a comment. We'd love to talk more.